It's okay not to be okay, but I promise I'm trying. By rayrae118. Chapter 10. Minerva and Harry were pleasantly surprised when they returned to find that Sirius had made good use of the rest of that afternoon. He had separated out their purchases and cajoled 2 of the McGonagall house elves into helping them paint their rooms. Harry's room now looked much more lived in. His walls were a pleasant grey, and his new red sheets and maroon comforter were on the bed. A soft plush blanket that Harry had fallen in love with after touching it just once complemented the colour scheme. It was a medium grey with a maroon border and was folded neatly at the end of the bed. The bookshelf had been built and was sitting next to the desk. The towels and toiletries had been placed in the bathroom, and the suits and nicer trousers and shirts had all been hung up in the closet. His dresser had also been stocked. His trunk was the only thing that still looked out of place. Sirius looked a little nervous. I thought I'd set everything up, but if you don't like it, we can change it. I left the posters and decorations for you to do with as you please, and I didn't want to go through your trunk. Harry nodded, choked up at the thoughtfulness. He didn't need to say anything. The huge hug he gave his godfather said it all. Minerva smiled at the display of affection before leaving them to continue setting up their rooms after informing them the supper would take place in half an hour. The days fell into a bit of a routine after that. Once they had finished their decorating, Sirius had been very happy with Harry's choice of Quidditch decoration, and approved of the robes Minerva had picked out. They settled into summer. Harry spent more time than the required hour working on his summer assignments and other studies every day, as the books he had acquired were quickly put to good use. He had learned more about potions just by reading the books Minerva had chosen for him than he had in the 3 years of lessons with Snape. He also wrote to his friends, assuring them that he was safe, and telling them that he'd see them soon. He wanted to ask Aunt Minerva about inviting his friends over, but was afraid she'd say no or disapprove of the request for some reason. After all, she spent most of the year around children. Maybe she wanted the summer to herself. Both she and Sirius were working on his insecurities, but it was slow going. Sirius took him out flying every afternoon and was thoroughly impressed by his godson's skills. The boy was a born flyer. Amelia came to visit at least 4 times a week, and Harry was somewhat pleased and surprised to realise that she seemed interested in Sirius, in a more than friendly way. Amelia broached this idea of bringing Susan along, but was hesitant to guess how she would take the meeting with an infamous murderer. Still, she hoped that he would be free soon, and that she could introduce him to her charge. She would never consider taking their relationship to the next level unless Susan was all right with it. If Sirius couldn't get along with Susan, they would never be anything. Not that she was worried. Watching him with Harry, she knew he'd be a great father. Or uncle. Harry had also finally asked the question that had been gnawing at him since the conversation with Minerva before leaving Hogwarts. What he learned had only made him more determined to get to know Neville. He knew what it was like to be parentless, and for Neville to still be able to see his, but not have them recognise him, was horrible. Learning that his own mother had been Neville's godmother was also surprising. One morning, a week or so after their shopping trip, he finally felt sure enough to ask his guardian if he could have some friends over. Minerva immediately agreed, and Harry leapt up with a grin, running to his bedroom to send off some invitations. Truthfully, he missed his friends, and now that he finally had a home, he wanted to show it off. Ron would love the Quidditch pitch, and he thought Hermione would drool over the library, both his own and the one McGonagall had on the ground floor. It housed a truly impressive number of books, though Sirius informed him that Potter Manor had at least as many, probably more. Learning that he had an ancestral home was a shock, and thus began the daily lessons from Sirius as to what he should have learnt from birth. The duties expected of him as the head of an ancient and noble house. It was a lot to learn, but Harry thought he was keeping up. Sitting at his desk, he quickly penned notes to Ron and Hermione, going into more detail about what had happened at the beginning of the summer, though in very vague terms, and he informed them where he was now living. He asked them if they could come and visit in a few days, mentioning the Quidditch pitch and library respectively. The easiest letters done, Harry began to compose a note to Ginny next. His letters to her had been more frequent than Ron and Hermione, and he had told her a lot about what had happened over the last few years. She was angry as him about his godfather's lack of trial, and couldn't wait to meet the man in person. He hesitated, unsure of what to say, and then just started writing. Like usual, the words just came. Dear Ginny, I know I promised you that I wouldn't keep anything secret, but things have just been happening so quickly I didn't really have any time to think about it. I am completely safe now, so you can stop worrying. Aunt Minerva kept her promise, and she's now my official guardian. We're trying to keep it secret, though, so please don't tell anyone. I'll tell Ron and Hermione, but other than that, I don't want the press to get involved. And since I'm the bloody boy who lived, you know they would. Anyway, the first thing Aunt Minerva did after signing the forms to become my guardian was take me shopping. She disapproved of my previous wardrobe and brought me my own mall. That's an exaggeration, but it seemed like it at the time. It was exhausting. I got to decorate my own room, and this place feels more like home than Privet Drive ever did. McGonagall Castle is huge. I've got so many rooms, and a rather impressive ballroom and a dining room included, a huge library, and a Quidditch pitch. I've gotten to fly with Padfoot every day, so I'll be on top form with the practices start next term. Amelia Bones has been by quite a bit. I think she and the old dog had something going on before the war ended. She's a bit stern, but Padfoot seems to make that go away. She reminds me a bit of Aunt Minerva, actually, though younger. It was a bit weird at first, living with a professor, but Aunt Minerva has been really great, and so understanding. This is the first summer I've actually felt like I might be sad to see an end. Anyway, I just wanted to ask if you'd like to visit in a few days. I'm inviting Ron and Hermione also, and I thought I might invite Neville as well. Did you know that in addition to my mother being his godmother, my godmother is his? I mean, I'd like to get to know him better, since this sort of makes us like godbrothers, right? I'm also considering asking Susan Bones if she'd like to come, but I think it might be awkward. Amelia wants her to come over, but is concerned she might not react well to meeting Padfoot. Neville might have some issues as well, but I know him better, and I think if I explain things, he'll keep quiet. Let me know if you can come. I miss you, and I can't wait to see you again. Love, Harry. He read it back and decided it would work, and that he would explain more in person when he told Ron and Hermione the truth. Next, he had to figure out what to say to a boy he had never really had a deep conversation with. He and Neville got along all right, but they weren't really close. He sort of felt like Neville was the odd man out. It was him and Ron, Seamus and Dean, and Neville was just sort of there. Harry was a little dismayed with himself for not taking the time to get to really know Neville. He had a feeling the other boy could be a great friend. Dear Neville, I know this might seem strange, since I've never written to you before, and we don't spend much time together at school. I just learned this summer that your mother was my godmother, and that mine was yours. I also know what happened, and if you ever want to talk about it, I've been told I'm a pretty good listener. I feel pretty guilty about not taking the time to get to know you before, since I think you could be a great friend. So I'd like to try to change that in the future. I mean, we're sort of like godbrothers, right? Anyway, I'm inviting a few friends over this week, and I'd like you to come as well. It would be just you, me, Ron, Hermione, and maybe Susan Bones. Her Aunt Amelia has been visiting a lot, so I thought I'd make the offer. Please let me know if you can come. The Floo address is McGonagall Castle. It's a long story. I'll explain when, in brackets, if you come. See you soon, Harry. Harry sent off his letters and picked up his Potions for Dummies book. Now that he understood more about why potion ingredients reacted the way they did, and why stirring and chopping certain ways was important, the subject was so much more interesting. He got affirmative responses from all his friends, including Neville, who sounded happy to be included, if not a little nervous. Amelia was slightly apprehensive, but agreed to bring Susan along on Thursday. She wanted her niece to meet Sirius, and this would prove a good setting. Harry was also a little worried. He wanted his friends to see his new life, but was afraid they would not listen to his explanation of Sirius's innocence, or, in Ron's case, be jealous that he was now living in a castle. He just hoped that inviting the boy over for some Quidditch would ease those feelings. Thursday morning dawned bright and clear, and Harry was up early in anticipation. He called Tibby and made sure the brooms in the broom shed would be ready for use, should they desire to fly. He also inquired about refreshments, and was informed that they would be well fed whenever they required sustenance. After breakfast, Harry moved himself into the sitting room with a book, waiting for 10 o'clock when his guests were due to arrive. He, Minerva, and Sirius had planned out what they would do, and believed the best way to start would be to explain to Neville and Susan about Harry's godfather first, before they moved on to anything else. The flue flared promptly at 10, and Harry looked up from intermediate transfiguration to greet Amelia, who took both his worried smile and tense posture, offering him a hand as she said hello. Her own nervousness was well hidden, though Harry was observant and had gotten to know the formidable woman quite well over the last few weeks, so he could see some concern as he stood up, setting the book down at the end table. The fire went green again, and Susan stepped out, looking around in fascination at her professor's home before she greeted her classmate. Susan had been confused to receive an invitation from Harry, but when her aunt told her that she wanted to introduce her to someone, Susan was willing to go along with it. The fire flared once more, spitting out Hermione first, then Neville a few minutes later. Ginny and Ron were the last to arrive, brushing ash from their clothes as they took in the comfortable room they found themselves in. Minerva entered the sitting room at that moment and smiled in the greeting she received. Most seemed quite intimidated to be in the presence of the Transfiguration Professor, but she did her best to set them at ease. Her students were surprised by how laid back she was here, away from school. Minerva offered them all a seat before she and Amelia turned to Susan and Neville. They had been told that Harry had already informed the youngest Weasleys about Sirius, and Ron and Hermione had met him recently. Asking for their patience and to listen to the whole story before they reacted, they informed the two of what had happened all those years ago. Susan and Neville listened, dumbfounded as they learned the massive failure in their justice system. It seemed so utterly unbelievable, yet when they looked at their classmates, they saw no signs of joking. None of the rest seemed surprised, so they figured the other Gryffindors had already known. Amelia took a deep breath. I am working on getting Sirius a trial, but the Minister is unwilling to listen to the possibility of him being innocent. I am confident that I can make it happen by the end of the summer, but it will take some hard work. Neville shifted. Could you talk with my grandmother? He asked quietly, blushing when all the attention turned to him. Gran's pretty important in the Wizengamot. If she knew about this, she would stand behind you. Gran's a big believer in truth and justice. Amelia nodded. She hadn't thought about that. But Madame Longbottom could be a big help. I will certainly do that. Thank you, Mr. Longbottom. Neville looked over at Harry to see a grateful expression on his classmate's face. He smiled, and Harry's grin was enough to return him at ease. Susan was the next to speak. Auntie, while I'm grateful to be in on the secret, why are you telling us? Amelia looked over at Minerva and Harry, and then the door. It opened a moment later, and Sirius made his way into the gathering, looking uncharacteristically serious. Amelia took a deep breath as she stood up. Neville and Susan followed suit. Susan? Neville, allow me to introduce you to Sirius Black, soon to be head of the ancient and noble House of Black. Lord Black, Neville Longbottom, heir to the ancient and noble House of Longbottom, and my niece, Susan Bones, heiress to the noble House of Bones. The introductions went smoothly, as both Susan and Neville had been trained in proper etiquette. Neville bowed slightly before offering his hand for the Black Lord to shake. While Sirius turned to Susan, she gave him a small curtsy and offered her own hand, which Sirius kissed lightly, smiling. It is a pleasure to meet you both, he said courteously. All of you. He turned to the rest of the room. Your parents were all great friends of mine, and I look forward to getting to know the next generation. Ron and Ginny seemed startled to know that their parents had been friends with Sirius, while Hermione obviously knew that she wasn't included in the parents' statement, but nevertheless was happy to see the man again, especially because Harry seemed so ecstatic. Neville almost grimaced but held it in. He didn't want to talk about his parents, and hoped the conversation would stay clear. Susan looked from her aunt to Sirius and back, noting the way they seemed to be standing just a little too close, an idea niggling in the back of her mind. Amelia had said she wanted to introduce someone. She wondered if there was anything going on between those two. She caught Harry's eye and he grinned and nodded. Susan returned that smile, happy for her aunt. Sirius seemed like a nice man, and she knew her aunt would get lonely sometimes. With the heavy explanations over, Harry led his friends on a tour of the castle. Hermione and Susan drooled over the library, while Ron couldn't wait to get onto the Quidditch pitch. The ballroom received some appreciative whistles from Ginny, and Neville's eyes widened when Harry pointed out the greenhouse. Harry somewhat nervously showed them his room, which all of them was met with appreciative looks from his friends. Ron liked the broom decor he had found in Quality Quidditch Supplies, and Ginny was enjoying the Muggle posters he had set up. They didn't move, but some of the artwork was so beautiful that it didn't need to. Hermione immediately went over to the bookshelf and started reading the titles, much to Harry's amusement. When she turned back to him, he smiled. "Yes, I'm bringing most of them with me to school, and yes, you can borrow them." Hermione blushed a little, but was pleased with his response. He was especially eager to read the history books. Goblin rebellions got rather old after a while. Ginny pulled Harry over to sit on the bed while Ron claimed the desk chair. Hermione also sat on the bed, and Susan and Neville claimed places on the floor. When Harry had first arrived, the rug had been rather dark brown. However, thanks to the wonderful world of magic, it was now a medium dark grey, which set off the walls quite nicely. "Spill, Potter," Ginny commanded, not letting go of his hand. She had a feeling he might need some comfort. Harry did look rather nervous, though he began speaking willingly, without any further prodding. Harry hesitantly began to tell them of what had happened at the beginning of the summer. He didn't go into much detail, unwilling to tell them all of it, especially Susan and Neville, whom he liked quite a bit, but didn't really know all that well yet. But he told them about his uncle's lost client, and how Vernon had decided it was his fault. He informed them how he had awoken a day later on the floor of his room, and decided he couldn't stay there any longer. He talked about how Sirius had found him dragging his trunk down the street, and how he had taken him to his family home before calling Minerva. Hearing Harry call her Aunt Minerva was a very strange experience, Ron reflected. He wasn't stupid enough to not be able to read between the lines, and he knew his friend's summer had been rougher than he had originally explained before he had left. He also couldn't ignore the tiny twinges of jealousy on that tour of the castle, but he squashed it down, just happy now that his friend was safe. After that, Harry quickly touched on the rest of his summer, the shopping trip, the summer studies, flying, and the like. For the first time, he truly looked carefree. He was still a kid in many ways, and for as long as he was able, he wanted to be able to act like one. The friends stayed in Harry's room a while longer, laughing and talking about all manner of things, from what they had been doing with their summers to their schoolwork. Hermione, Susan, and Neville spent some time talking about the electives that Ginny and hopefully Harry would be taking, telling them what to expect. Harry was surprised to learn that Neville was also taking arithmancy, and was pleased he would hopefully be able to share another class with him. Susan was interested to hear what Minerva had managed to do for Harry. She had known it was possible to change electives, and she was quite impressed that Harry was managing to fit an entire year's worth of ancient runes and arithmancy work into the span of one summer. When Ron's stomach loudly told them it was time for lunch, the 6 new friends made their way down to the dining room, where they found an impressive spread laid out before them. It appeared the adults had already eaten, so they were informed by Tibby, so they couldn't wait before falling down on the sandwiches, crisps, roast potatoes, and salad with a relish. After lunch, they decided to do some flying, though Hermione and Neville seemed less than eager. Harry quietly pulled Ron aside and suggested, before they discussed any Quidditch matches, that they work on helping their friends get more comfortable in the air. Ron was willing and took Hermione with him, while Harry watched, amused, before turning back to see Ginny looking at him knowingly. He just shook his head, and together they spent some time with Neville. Susan was more willing to show them a few tricks that helped her, and soon enough the two were in the air, circling slowly. Ginny was the next one up, and Harry was surprised by the amount of ease she showed on a broom. He pulled up next to her riding his own firebolt. "Where do you learn to do that?" he asked, smiling. "According to Ron, you've never flown in any of the Weasley family Quidditch matches." Ginny scowled. "They'd never let me play. I've been sneaking out to ride their brooms since I was 6. I was hoping I could play chaser once Angelina and Alicia leave the team in a few years." Harry nodded, his smile widening into a grin at her explanation of her prowess. Ginny suddenly looked concerned. "Please don't tell anyone about the whole stealing the brooms thing. I'd never hear the end of it if my brothers found out." Harry nodded in his agreement, and the two flew off to join an impromptu game of aerial tag that seemed to be going on. It was probably an hour or so later when Harry and Ginny sat down at the edge of the Quidditch pitch, near the trees that provided some comfortable shade. The rest of the group was still up there enjoying themselves, even Neville and Hermione, now that they were more comfortable. Since they were alone, Ginny wasted no time in demanding a full explanation. Harry didn't even bother arguing. He took out his wand and set up a few basic privacy wards that he had learnt from common wards everyone should know, causing Ginny to raise an eyebrow at him. Harry just shrugged. The wards around the property prevent anyone from telling when magic is being used. I've been able to get a lot of practicing done. Aunt Minerva said that she or Sirius need to be present whenever I'm using magic, in case something goes wrong. Ginny nodded, and then gave Harry a look that he understood completely. With a sigh, he began to tell her everything, from the moment he set foot in Four Privet Drive at the beginning of the summer, and through his escape. He told her about how Amelia had been investigating his uncle, and how he hoped that they could find something else to prosecute him with, since he didn't really want it to become known, as he knew in the Wizarding world would find out if Amelia had him arrested for child abuse. Ginny listened in silence, offering her support as he needed. She said nothing when he was done, and just gave the boy a weaselly hug, passing on all her feelings as best she could. She somehow knew that Harry understood as he hugged her back before the two separated. They didn't really need to talk about what had just happened. The pair continued to talk for a while longer before a shout from above drew their attention skyward. The rest of their friends were descending, so Harry took down the privacy wards, making sure his wand was once more hidden before Hermione saw and started in on him using magic over the summer. The six of them put their brooms away and trooped back inside, feeling tired but happy. They were met by the three adults, who invited them to have tea, and while the rest of the afternoon disappeared in a whirlwind of stories and laughter. Sirius had them all in stitches as he recounted several pranks he and the Marauders had pulled. Minerva looked appropriately stern and upset at his rule-breaking, but they could all see her lips were fighting a smile. Soon enough it was time for everyone to return home. Amelia and Susan were the first to leave, thanking Harry and Minerva for their hospitality and receiving an open-ended invitation to visit any time. Susan surprised everyone by giving Sirius a hug, whispering something in his ear. When she stepped back, both of them were smiling. Amelia also surprised the group by giving Sirius a chaste kiss on the cheek, though if her look was anything to go by, there might be more where that came from soon. Sirius' smile turned into a full-on grin. Hermione left next, saying goodbye to everyone and hugging Harry tightly, telling him how happy she was for him in a whisper that went unheard by everyone else. After she called out, "The leaky cauldron!" and vanished, Ron and Ginny were next. Ginny spent longer saying goodbye, hugging Harry just as tightly as Hermione, and extracting another promise to keep writing. Harry nodded his agreement. "And you guys are welcome any time," he told them, looking questioningly at Minerva, smiling when he received a nod from her. Ginny beamed. "And you're welcome at the Burrow," she informed him. Not that he really needed the invitation. He had had a standing offer since the first summer after first year. When it was only Neville left, Sirius and Minerva left the room, and Harry asked Neville to sit down. He had wanted some time alone to speak to the other boy, and so had asked him to wait until the last to depart. Once alone, though, he wasn't sure how to begin. Finally, he just decided to go with the truth. "I'm sorry for the way I've treated you over the years," he said shamefully. Neville shook his head. "You didn't really treat me badly," Harry replied earnestly. "You became friends with Ron. It's only natural you'd want to spend more time with him." "But I didn't really spend much time getting to know you. You're a good guy, and I'm sorry I didn't recognize that earlier. I would like to correct my mistake, if you're willing." Neville looked confused. "What do you mean?" Harry leaned forward. "I want us to be friends. We've got a connection simply because of our parents, but I want to forge that kind of bond with you. You heard Sirius. Our dads were really good friends from the beginning, and so were our mums. From what he's told me so far, our parents have always stood side by side with one another." Neville nodded. The Potter and Longbottom families were long-time allies. "I'd like that," he said, somewhat shyly. Harry looked down. "I'd also like to know a bit about my godmother," he admitted hesitantly. "I know you don't know much." but maybe your grandmother could tell me a little. I know Sirius would be happy to tell you about your parents." This was getting into uncomfortable territory, so Neville just nodded. "I could talk to her," he replied. Harry grinned. "Thanks, mate," he said. Neville had to get home, so with a quick goodbye and a promise to write, and maybe visit again soon, he disappeared. End of chapter 10. I'm loving this. I love that Harry is opening up to his friends, and I hope that you enjoyed it too. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe, and click that bell to get notified whenever I upload a new chapter. Hope you guys have a great day, night, or whatever time zone you're in. Bye, my guys, gals and non-binary pals.